This video is brought to you by The Daily Upside, a free newsletter that's delivering you financial news and context to your inbox every weekday. Look, it's 2022, and you know what the deal is with the news by now. It's biased, it's untrustworthy, it's expensive, and it's time-consuming. It's also somehow too sensationalist, and also manages to be boring all at the same time. I don't know how they manage it, but they do. Fortunately, there is The Daily Upside, which was founded in 2019 by a group of bankers and journalists to provide fast, easy, actionable insights into the world of financial news. Every weekday before the markets open, The Daily Upside delivers a morning brief followed by more detailed stories that are shaping the business world directly to your inbox. Think of it as a 5-minute brief to prime you on whatever you might need to know for the day. On top of that, they also write a deeper once-a-week newsletter that explains more complex business trends, giving you that sweet, sweet financial knowledge that you need to sound smart at happy hour. Yes, yes. Or, whatever else you might use it for. The Daily Upside is read by more than 300,000 subscribers, including yours truly, because fact boys facts have to come from somewhere. If you want to sign up to the Daily Upside, just click that link in the description box below and you can get free daily news sent straight to your inbox. And of course, if you don't like it, you can just unsubscribe at any time. Simple, brilliant, easy, love it. Go check out the Daily Upside using the link in the description below. And now, today's video. You wake up to find yourself in total darkness. No matter how hard you strain your eyes, not a single glimmer of light can be seen. Shifting around, you find yourself lying in a long, narrow space with thin padding all around and barely enough room to move. The air is stale and smells faintly of damp soil. Suddenly, the horrifying realization strikes. You're lying in a casket, entombed under 6 feet of earth. If this sounds like your worst nightmare, congratulations, you likely suffer from taphophobia, the fear of being buried alive. While today such a fear might seem completely irrational, for many people in the 18th and 19th centuries, premature burial was very serious business, bordering on a cultural obsession. And as with any trendy irrational societal fear, there were no shortage of innovators willing to offer clever and eccentric solutions guaranteed to prevent you and your loved ones from entering the grave still breathing. Welcome to the macabre and fascinating world of the safety coffin. While tales of premature burial are as old as human history, the first credible reports date back to around the 16th century. In his medical treatise, History of Life and Death, English polymath Francis Bacon wrote that when the tomb of 13th century Scottish philosopher John Duns Scotus was opened, the corpse was found outside of its coffin, the apparently still living Scotus having crawled his way out before dying for real. In the 17th century, there emerged the story of Englishwoman Alex Blunden, who, as the tale goes, was knocked unconscious by an overdose of poppy tea prescribed by her doctor. After holding a mirror to her face to check if she was still breathing, the doctor declared Alice dead, and after 2 days she was laid in the ground. A few days later, however, children playing near her grave heard noises and ran to tell their schoolmaster. The schoolmaster investigated and discovered that Alice was indeed still alive, but it took another day for her to be exhumed. When the coffin was finally opened, Alice was so near death that she was left in the grave and a guard posted to keep watch overnight. The next morning she was found dead, but half out of her coffin, having once again attempted to crawl from the grave. An even more gothic story dates from the late 18th century and concerns one Countess Emma Edgecombe. According to the legend, the Countess was buried wearing a valuable ring. A gravedigger who spotted the ring during the burial returned to the graveyard at night to retrieve it. But as he made to snatch the ring from the grave, the Countess suddenly sprang to life, and the gravedigger, his pants likely a little moister, ran for the hills and was never seen again. Meanwhile, the Countess, still wrapped in a burial shroud, walked half a mile from the grave back to her home, shocking everyone who believed her to be dead. To this day, a paved Countess's path at the Edgecombe estate in Cornwall marks the path of Emma's undead journey. While most such stories are either highly embellished or outright fabrications, they do contain a small kernel of truth. For much of history, determining whether someone was actually dead was less than an exact science. The methods of detecting life limited to listening for a heartbeat or placing a mirror near the mouth and nose. Furthermore, many diseases such as cholera, malaria, and African sleeping sickness can produce comatose states which would have been near indistinguishable from death. Indeed, the aforementioned John Duns Scotus is believed to have slipped into a coma before being buried, while the poppy tea consumed by Alice Blunden would have contained morphine and codeine, both of which are known to depress breathing. Thus, it's entirely possible that up until the 20th century, many people were actually buried alive, though the exact number is impossible to determine without digging up and checking every single grave for signs of escape. But whatever the actual risk, the fear of being buried alive weighed heavily on the people of the 18th and 19th centuries. For instance, American President George Washington's final request was reportedly to have me decently buried, but do not let my body be put into a vault in less than 2 days after I am dead. While the dying words of Polish composer Chopin were, "The earth is suffocating, swear to make them cut me open so that I won't be buried alive." But while a great many people worried about being buried alive, a few enterprising souls actually did something about it. Among the first to devise a practical means of avoiding a premature burial was English Protestant minister Robert Robinson, who upon his death in 1791 was placed in a special coffin fitted with a glass window. This was placed in a mausoleum with a door such that a watchman or family member could check periodically whether Robinson's breath had fogged the glass. Only once decomposition had well and truly set in was the mausoleum finally sealed. Even more elaborate was the coffin constructed by Duke Ferdinand of Brunswick prior to his death in 1792. In addition to a glass window, Ferdinand's creation included a ventilation tube to supply fresh air and was fitted with a lock instead of being nailed shut. In a pocket sewn into his burial shroud, the Duke carried 2 keys, one for the coffin lid and one for the tomb door. This is considered to be history's first example of a safety coffin, a bizarre technological trend that over the next century would spawn hundreds of weird and wonderful variations. In 1798, P.G. Pessler, a German priest, suggested that freshly buried corpses be provided with a string connected to the church bell tower so that if they should happen to wake in the grave, they could call for help by ringing the church bells. While this particular implementation was highly impractical, Pessler's idea inspired dozens of designs featuring various bells, gongs, chimes, signal flaps, and even loud pyrotechnic charges that could be activated from inside the coffin. Bell-equipped safety coffins are commonly claimed to be the origin of the idioms dead ringer and saved by the bell, but this is actually incorrect. In reality, dead ringer derives from the older expression ring in the changes, meaning to fraudulently swap one thing out for another, while saved by the bell comes from the sport of boxing. Following in Pessler's footsteps, a safety coffin craze swept through 19th century Germany, with German inventors patenting no fewer than 33 designs of ever-increasing complexity and eccentricity. One 1829 design by Dr. Johann Gottfried featured a bell connected via strings to the occupant's head, hands, and feet, such that even the slightest movement would set it off. A special protective housing prevented the bell from being accidentally rung by the winds and rainwater from running down the breathing tube, while a screen stopped insects from entering the coffin. Once alerted by the bell, a graveyard watchman could use a bellows to pump air into the coffin until its occupant could be exhumed. Another variation was designed by Count Michel de Karanitsa-Karnitsky, Chamberlain to Tsar Nicholas II of Russia. Named rather modestly Le Carnis, the device used a spring-loaded glass ball placed on the corpse's chest to detect breathing or movement. Once activated, the mechanism opened the coffin lid, raised a signal flag, rang an electric bell, and opened a breathing tube to the surface. Unfortunately, the device proved somewhat unreliable, and an 1897 demonstration wherein Karnitsky's assistants were buried alive ended poorly when the signaling mechanism failed. Thankfully, the breathing tube activated as designed, and the doubtless rather annoyed assistant was safely disinterred. Unsurprisingly, it failed to attract any buyers. Other salesmen were more successful. Dr. Adolf Gutsmith, who patented his own safety coffin in 1822, promoted his invention by being buried alive for hours and eating a full meal of soup, bratwurst, sauerkraut, beer, and cake through the coffin's integrated feeding tube. As time went by, safety coffins incorporated ever more bells and whistles. For example, Franz Wester's 1868 improved burial case included a shaft and ladder to allow the prematurely buried to climb out of their own grave. Charles Seeler and Frederick Borntrager's 1885 design included a clockwork-driven ventilation fan. Johann Jakob Thulen's 1907 patent was a spring-loaded coffin lid, and Edwin Crosby and L. Ray Henry's 1904 patent was a telegraph to allow the coffin's occupant to communicate with the surface using Morse code. Somewhat bafflingly, however, despite their apparent sophistication, many of these designs failed to include any sort of breathing tube, making them of somewhat dubious utility. There were also more elegant proposals. In the 1790s, one Pastor Beck suggested suggested fitting the coffin with a vertical trumpet-like tube which would supply both fresh air and allow the occupant to call for help. The local priest could also check on the state of the corpse by sniffing for the odor of putrefaction rising from the tube. In later designs, the tube was packed with a chemical such as lead acetate, which could change color in the presence of gases like hydrogen sulfide produced by decomposition. Once putrefaction was confirmed, the tube could be removed and the grave sealed. Yet despite this flurry of innovation, there is little evidence that any of these designs was ever manufactured or purchased on a large scale, nor that one ever saved someone from premature burial. There are many reasons for this. For example, many of the mechanisms designed to detect signs of life were so sensitive that they would have been triggered by the natural bloating or settling of the corpse, resulting in endless false positives. Even chemical detectors were not foolproof. Rotting teeth, for example, also produce hydrogen sulfide, thus a prematurely buried person with poor dental hygiene, like most people in the 18th and 19th centuries, would have appeared to be decomposing. Nonetheless, safety coffins captured the popular imagination, featuring in many works of contemporary fiction. In 1844, master of the macabre Edgar Allan Poe pens the short story The Premature Burial, in which the narrator suffers from a condition known as catalepsy, which produces bouts of death-like paralysis. Gripped by overwhelming taphophobia, he refuses to leave his house and goes to great lengths to avoid being buried alive, including constructing an elaborate safety coffin. In the end, however, these precautions appear to be for naught, for one day the narrator awakes to find himself lying in his grave. But in a last-minute twist, he is revealed to actually be sleeping in the berth of a small boat. This realization shocks the narrator out of his morbid obsession, and he is miraculously cured of his catalepsy. While safety coffins never caught on commercially, in many parts of the world precautions were nonetheless taken to avoid premature burial. Such measures could be as simple as waiting several days before burying a corpse, as had been practiced in the days of ancient Rome. Others were rather more elaborate. The 1820s, for example, saw the introduction of portable death chambers in where else other than Germany. These were essentially simplified safety coffins erected over an open grave, equipped with a signaling bell and a window for observing the corpse. The recently deceased would be left in the chamber above ground until decomposition set in, whereupon a trapdoor would be opened, dropping the corpse into the grave. The grave would then be filled in and the death chamber would be reused. In the 1880s, lichen houses or waiting mortuaries were a fixture of several German cities, particularly Munich. In these establishments, the deceased were laid out on zinc trays filled with antiseptic and monitored by staff for signs of life. As with the death chambers, only when decomposition was well underway would the corpses be sent to the graveyard for burial. Waiting mortuaries or morgues became popular attractions in the late 19th century, with crowds of people paying good money to gawk at the fresh corpses. Indeed, the modern term morgue comes from an old French word meaning to watch or observe. Cultural obsession with premature burial reached a fever pitch in the mid to late 19th century, fueled by a series of deadly cholera epidemics and the work of death activists like William Tebb and Roger S. Chew. Tebb was a businessman who devoted much of his spare time to social causes such as animal rights and pacifism, while Chew was a doctor who had himself avoided being prematurely buried thanks to the sharp-eyed intervention of a family member. Together with Edward Volman, another premature burial survivor, in 1896, Tebb and Chew founded the London Association for the Prevention of Premature Burial, and in 1905 published a book titled Premature Burial and How It May Be Prevented. An instant bestseller that is still in print today, Premature Burial was a complete guide to untimely interment, listing various medical conditions that could produce apparent death and methods for determining whether someone was actually dead. These techniques range from the advanced, such as the then new technique of artificial respiration, to the extreme, such as blistering the corpse's skin with hot iron or shocking it with electricity, to the highly questionable, such as injecting the corpse with morphine or strychnine to make doubly sure it was dead. The book also featured detailed accounts of 149 cases of premature burial and 219 cases of near premature burial, meticulously collected and catalogued by Tebb. Whether any of these accounts are actually credible, however, is highly questionable, for a study conducted in Paris found that of the 465,000 people taken to waiting mortuaries between 1822 and 1845, not a single one came back to life prior to being buried. Despite being widely mocked by the medical community, Tebb continued to advocate tirelessly for the prematurely buried until his death in 1917, whereupon, following his own advice, his corpse was left unburied for a week before being cremated. His efforts, however, did eventually lead to real change. In researching historical accounts of premature burial, Tebb discovered that the vast majority of cases resulted from death being pronounced by a non-medical individual. Indeed, at the time, most death certificates were issued by doctors who had never even examined the corpse. Thanks to the advocacy of Tebb and others, the laws were eventually changed such that death could be legally only declared by a medical professional. By this time, however, the actual risk of premature burial had reached an all-time low. One reason for this was the widespread adoption of embalming, which guaranteed that a corpse was actually dead prior to burial. Another was the development of advanced medical diagnostic equipment, such as the electrocardiogram or EKG, which allowed even the faintest signs of life to be detected. But while the risk of being buried alive is for all intents and purposes zero, it does occasionally still happen. In 2011, Fagilyu Mukhamatzyanov of Kazan, Russia, collapsed in her home and was declared dead of a heart attack. Several days later, while lying in a casket at her funeral, she suddenly came to and, somewhat understandably, began to freak the out. She was immediately rushed to hospital, where she survived for another 12 minutes before dropping dead of heart failure. Another case was reported in 2014 when 78-year-old Walter Williams of Holmes County was declared dead, zipped into a body bag, and sent to a funeral home. But while lying in the embalming room, Williams began to twitch, while an understandably shocked embalmer noticed he was still breathing. Williams was rushed to the hospital, where he clung on to life for another 2 weeks before passing away. For real this time. If these stories make your skin crawl and reignited a lingering fear of premature burial, then never fear, for you can still buy your very own safety coffin. In 1995, inventor Fabrizio Caselli patented a modern twist on this Victorian-era technology, incorporating all the latest bells and whistles, including an emergency alarm, an intercom, a self-contained oxygen system, a flashlight, a heart monitor, and an automatic defibrillator. A more practical 2014 patent by Abdul Rider Al-Safar describes a portable alarm system that can be fitted to any standard coffin, featuring a lamp to illuminate the interior of the coffin, a button-operated alarm, and an intercom. If no signs of life are forthcoming, the system can easily be removed and used on another grave. So, thanks to the wonders of modern technology, you can sleep easy, knowing that your final rest won't be rudely interrupted. Probably.